this always happen? Why am I doing this right now? Okay, bye. Squish and mush. Okay. Today I thought it'd be a good idea to talk about root rot. I'm tired of this plant, but I've had a very big pot of it for a very long time. And every time I kind of slightly ignore it and then go, oh crap, I forgot to water that for 8 weeks. And then I water it. Of course, when you water dehydrated roots, they're not going to quickly take up that moisture, and you got yourself a recipe for rot, which is great. And so that's what I'm dealing with again for like the 18,000th time for this plant. Usually plants that can't handle inconsistent care just leave my collection. I give them away or sell them or whatever before I completely kill them. But okay, let's talk about characteristics of root rot. Number 1, any browning around the edges, browning tips, especially if you got some of that yellow in there too. Oh, so pretty. We love some yellow leaves. Gotta love a Dollar Tree planter, right? These were $1 for, I think, 2, and they have like the little drainage net thing in the bottom, but I went ahead and poked holes anyway, and they're just still, these holes are just not sufficient for the drainage that this plant needs. So I can tell that it probably has root rot because it's not happy and the soil is wet, even though I know I haven't watered it in a while. So let's have a look at it and see what we can do to kind of save any part of it, if that's even possible. Before I pulled this guy out thinking it was just a dead leaf laying on the soil. No, there's a stem there. It's just rotten. And I'm gonna go through and just take the dead leaves. As soon as I yanked on this guy, that's what came out. Ooh. So I can tell also evidence of root rot. If you're not seeing right off the bat just like some real mushy leaves, you can tell also because the sheath, the outside of the root will just kind of slide off and you're left with this weird stringy thing. That's not a healthy root. That is the inside of a dead root after root rot. I am just checking out the stem to see if there's anything there to save. No, it's all mush. So this stem is dead. Fun times. These definitely have some growth on them though. I'm gonna see how many I can get out. First, I'm gonna grab a little saucer so I can dump the rest of the soil and the plant. So I like using these little 6-inch deep saucers. They're just good for kind of transferring plants or checking roots, whatever you need to do. Oh yeah, this is really bad. I might have killed this plant completely, finally, which, like, is it bad that that gives me some real relief? Makes me feel relieved. Okay, so here's what I'm left with. Let's start with the smaller ones. Okay, here's one that, again, it's lots of mush. I like to just kind of barely, gently tug at the roots, and whatever falls off, that's all root. It's not dirt, it's mushy root. Whatever falls off, and that's okay. We're gonna not freak out about it. We're just cleaning it up. So I do see the end of this root is mush, but I do see some healthy root at the top. So hopefully, and this one looks pretty healthy too. So hopefully this stem, even though there's no open leaves on it, there are some that it's trying to push out. So hopefully we can save this stem and I'll be able to at least pass this plant on to somebody else. I like plants that bounce back really easily and that kind of thrive on neglect or inconsistent care. All right, doesn't look great, but here's the thing. These are healthy roots. If I just barely, I'm not like trying to rip it off, but if I just barely pull on it, it doesn't come off on its own. That tells me that it's probably alive. I can also see the color isn't totally black. And if I squish it a little, it doesn't smush. So probably okay. Now, the other one right here, it's also looking pretty firm and healthy, but here at the end, I did pull off some rot from right there. So before I treat this set of roots, I am going to cut that off, and I'll show you that in just a moment because I'll do it to all the stems at the same time. Oh, here's another good example of one that's like, looks like it's given up, but look, there's a new leaf right there. Okay, oh, this is a good one. So here's another example of some new growth, new root growth right there. Looks pretty nice, happy with that. Yeah, nice and white, but I'm still getting mushy dead root off the same stem. So let's get rid of that and leave the good stuff. Okay, this one, long set of roots for this tiny little leaf. This happens a lot on Monstera, especially like with albos. When they rot, they tend to do this because they have nice thick roots, but they just slide right off. That's rot. This is not worth saving, right? You get these little roots that look like hairs. They're not roots. They're leftovers from the dead roots, and you don't need them. And the last one is the big guy. This leaf's not too happy, but it's still mostly green, so I'm gonna leave it. Might just pull off that crispy end. There we go. Cool, we'll leave that guy. Look at this cute little leaf, it's adorable. And new leaf on the way. Okay, this root looks pretty healthy and it's putting out some new white growth, so that's good. But the end, yeah, the end just came right off. There's what I'm left with. Okay, so plenty of good stem nodes and a couple of healthy new root growth to work with. So what I like to do in this situation, so these already have some roots. I'm not gonna root them in water. With stems that already have some roots like this, if it's adapted to soil, I like to go ahead and put it back in soil. I'm not gonna put these into water because I think, I don't know, in my experience, it just promotes more rot. I am going to repot this in a very well draining mix in a more well draining pot. Let's use some little tricks to kind of promote healthier root growth. I have just a little plastic cup and a bottle of hydrogen peroxide, like straight from H-E-B or whatever grocery store, CVS, whatever. I like to go ahead and pour maybe 1/8 of a cup, like a couple of tablespoons into a little cup. Okay, so I've added water to the hydrogen peroxide. So the peroxide was up to what, about right here. So about 1/3 of the mixture is peroxide. Don't worry too much about the ratio. It's not gonna make a huge difference. What this is for is just a quick little rinse. Hydrogen peroxide is gonna help to kill the bacteria that causes root rot. It's an anaerobic bacteria, which means it doesn't survive very well in highly oxygenated environments. So we're gonna just give it a good swish, a little dip in the hydrogen peroxide. And you can see it's already kind of doing a good job getting that dirt and yuck, nasty business off of the roots. So it really only needs to touch the roots, and I try to avoid doing anything like extra, right? There's no reason to get it on the leaves, so why do it, right? Okay, so all I've got with me are my ridiculous aquarium scissors. This part is actually not rotten, it's just dead from drying out. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut it off because any dead plant matter that you bury will eventually rot, even if it's not rotten right now. So there's that. And then like I mentioned earlier, the end of this root has a little leftover rot from the piece that I pulled off of it. I'm not gonna cut right at the top of that. I know we usually tend to want to preserve as much of the root as possible, but you're not doing yourself any favors by trying to go right up to the edge of where the rot ends, because generally it's probably just inside there too. You can't really see it yet. But that bacteria is still in there. So let's go ahead and cut. I'm gonna go about 1/2 inch up, maybe 1/3 of an inch up. And that just is up to your judgment. Depends on how much root you're working with. So if I were working with only this root, let's say this was my plant and I had only that one root, I think that's a solid amount that's left to work with, and it looks really healthy. If this root was questionable, like up here too, I'd go ahead and just cut this stem or cut the root at the stem and give it a chance to just reroot entirely. So sometimes it's a matter of knowing like, this is not worth my time, and just letting it, you know, reroot if you have those viable nodes. Since I made a cut, I'm just going to give it another quick dip in the peroxide to make sure that none of that bad bacteria got into that fresh wound that I gave my plant. Okay, so I am not going to reuse the soil. That's something that I think folks don't mention a lot, but it may be good to go ahead and just say, in case you're thinking of reusing the soil that your plant was having trouble in, don't do it. That's where all that anaerobic bacteria lives. And in fact, check it out, some dead roots that were left behind, right? So this is a no-go. I'm gonna dump this in the garden so that it can just, whatever nutrients are left in it, the topsoil can absorb, and eventually it'll get washed down into my garden plants that can handle a little bit of bacteria. Very chunky perlite, orchid bark, and charcoal. If you want to see the exact ingredients that I put into my aroid mix, then go ahead and watch the video that I've linked below. It's called Soil Mix and Choosing Pots. I like for my roots to fill a good amount of the pot that I'm putting this into. Otherwise, you end up with really unevenly watered roots while you're watering, and it's just not going to be effective. You're going to end up with some parts of your plant drying out, some parts of it continuing to rot. It's going to be all over the place. So since I have a very small amount of roots, that's not filling enough of this container for me to be comfortable with this being a good size. So I'm actually going to grab another one of my little plastic cups. This one I am reusing, but I just had sphagnum in this before, so I know it was safe, nothing rotted in here, and it's nice and dry. It hasn't been a problem, so I'm not worried about that. I am going to go ahead and just pour a little bit of my mixture into the cup at the bottom first. So just about, let's see, about like that. And then I'll set my little, I can't call them cuttings, they're just half dead plants. I'm gonna set those inside the cup and see where we're at. Yeah, that's a better size for the amount of roots that we have. And then I like to just use 2 fingers to suspend the plant where I want it to sit, as I use a spoon in my little bowl to go ahead and fill up the rest of the pot, or in this case, the cup. There she is. Looking good. Now there's one more step. It's very, very important, and that is drainage. Now, if this had a really extensive root system that I knew were extending down to the bottom of the cup, I would do this first. But this is my favorite way to create drainage in a cup like this. I used to take scissors or a screwdriver or whatever and try to like poke holes in the bottom. The reason I don't like to do that is when you poke a hole in something, whatever material that is, usually plastic, ends up kind of opening up and pointing up, and it catches a lot of water and material, and it actually doesn't do its job. I like to remove sections of the cup so that the water, I know, is not getting caught on anything. There's nothing plugging up, you know, whatever drainage hole I'm creating. So I like to use just a pair of scissors, and I cut the edge of my cup so that, these scissors are not the greatest, so that I have this little like lanceolate drainage hole, okay? And I'll just do that around the bottom maybe 3 or 4 times. Cool. So just like that, I've cut just along the edges, and I know there's no plastic like curled up into the cup. I'm gonna go ahead and water this guy, set him on a saucer, and then I'll be back with one more tip. Not every time we deal with rot ends up being on a plant that's rooted. Sometimes it happens on just a stem that we're trying to get to root, right? I want to show you kind of a trick for how to get a stem that you're rooting to either stop rotting or to just prevent rot on a plant that you know is really prone to it. Okay, so I have cut this only as an example. This is it looks like a pretty well reverted stem from my Albosingonium. I don't see any white on the stem. We'll see what happens with this new leaf, but this one is not typically prone to rot for me, so just keep in mind that it's not really a commentary on this plant. I'm just using it as an example. So here's what I'll do. If, for example, this was a very expensive Monstera albo that I had ordered and I was really concerned that it was gonna rot, here's one thing you can do to prevent rot in your water rooting cutting. The bacteria that causes root rot is anaerobic, which means it survives very well in low oxygen environments. So we want to introduce as much oxygen as possible to the vessel that we're going to be rooting our plant in. Yeah, this is extra. This is super extra. So for all of you that are rolling your eyes and thinking, what the hell is that? This is an air stone. Okay, I have an aquarium. I've had several aquariums. I'm down to just one right now. I started thinking, you know what? Why on earth don't people use air stones to root their cuttings, especially if you're rooting more than one in a cup? So an air stone just requires a pump and some airline tubing. This pump is extra AF because it is it has 2 spots, so I could power multiple things with this pump. You don't need something this enormous or this powerful. This is just all I have right now to show you. So there's much smaller ones and they're very, very cheap. You can get one for like 10 bucks and it'll last you forever. So the airline tubing you can also pick up at Lowe's or Home Depot or any aquarium store, Petco, PetSmart, whatever. These are also very cheap. They're usually less than $1 for like a pack of them. And it looks like just like a piece of pumice kind of. And all it's doing is this pump is taking in air, passing it through the tube and pushing it out of this stone. And this stone has very, very fine holes in it so that when it comes out into the water, that oxygen is able to dissolve into the water really, really well. So let me show you what that looks like. Okay, so here's what it looks like. Just my little pump plugged into the outlet I have on my wall and the airline tubing with the stone just set into this cup of water. That's gonna ensure that the water stays nice and oxygenated. So this way, I can not only keep this on a heat mat without worrying about rot, but I can put multiple cuttings into it. So this is a weird begonia I have. If anybody knows the species of this begonia, I would love to know. I've been told 2 or 3 times and I forget every time. So if somebody could write it in the comments where I could go back and look at it, that would be great. I'm gonna stick him in there. Some gorgeous Hoya Bella cuttings that are already rooting. Get some of that good rooting hormone in there. And an Engleriana that's also just started to root. All right, guys, before it gets dark, thank you so much for joining me, and hopefully I will see you soon. I know it's been a little while since I've posted. It is star season, and I'm a teacher, so pray for me, y'all. I'll be back soon. Bye.